Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor Narayan from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat. Hello and welcome to episode 10 of India Rising Strategic Conversations with Mohal and Kishor, a show in which we analyze happenings from around the world and their impact on India. Today's episode will be an overview of India's foreign policy, where we plan to discuss the status of India's foreign policy as it stands today. And for this episode, we have a distinguished guest with us today, Ramaharitha Pusarla, who is an author, columnist, who writes regularly on mind.net on India's foreign policy. In addition, she also writes on India's domestic policies and other social issues. She can be found on Twitter at Haritha. Welcome to the episode, Haritha.
Hi, Kishor and Mohal. Thanks for having me on your show.
Welcome, Haritha.
Yeah. So let's begin with Haritha. So Haritha, when we talk about India's foreign policy, we basically think about our immediate neighborhood and look at how India's foreign policy shapes up our neighborhood, and also vice versa, where the neighborhood shapes our foreign policy, which can include countries from the SAARC region and also the wider SAARC region like Afghanistan, Myanmar, and even China in that regard. So if you look at India's neighborhood from that perspective, what do you look at as the overarching dimension of India's foreign policy and how it is shaping up?
Yeah. Traditionally, India is being referred to as Indian subcontinent. So this itself underlines like how India is intricately connected with its immediate neighborhood. So the Indian subcontinent summarizes the inclusion of Pakistan, Bangladesh. India has a deep-rooted historical connections with these countries. So coming to the contemporary times, there has been a lot of conundrum in this India's immediate neighborhood. Beginning year, from February this year, this political crisis, which is triggered in Maldives, has actually been looked at. India is going to look at the whole situation unfolding, and even strategists across the world have eagerly looked towards India to see how India is going to handle this situation. But thankfully, as expected, while hawkish strategists have always believed that what happened in Maldivian crisis when emergency was imposed by former President Yamin, India, to much of the surprise, has remained quite reticent and then allowed the things to unfold and unfurl. Before dwelling deep into India's connect with its immediate neighborhood, I wish to even emphasize Prime Minister Modi, immediately after taking charge as a Prime Minister, has understood the importance of having friendly ties with neighborhood, and has rolled out neighborhood first policy. To this end, he made his first visit to Bhutan and then to Nepal and to all other countries barring Maldives. So, though his scheduled visit to Maldives was in 2015, he wanted to, barring Maldives, Modi has visited all the neighboring countries owing to the domestic crisis and also deteriorated relationships with Maldives. But now, like with but taking an exception to this, managed quite well its neighboring relations with all other countries, starting with Sri Lanka. In though it is believed that India has midwifed coalition between Sirisena and Vikramasinghe. The coalition has like existed or carried out its functions for 2 years without any hitch. And then the crisis again in Sri Lanka, which has started after President Sirisena has ousted Vikramasinghe on October 26th. Even then, the strategist India as how it's going to tackle and taking its own time to respond to the situations unfurling in its neighborhood. India maintained strategic patience, and well after 2 days after this announcement by Sirisena, India has reposed faith in the democratic institutions of Sri Lanka, saying that conditions are going faith in democratic institutions and believe that um, the political scenario will be restored pretty much in a pretty much soon. So, considering the present situation as of now, India Sri Lankan crisis has come to an uh, rather steadily good level of reconciliation after 51 days, and now Vikramasinghe has been inducted as the prime minister, and things are pretty much falling into place.
Kishor, what are your thoughts on Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think another way to look at it is yes, there will be political uncertainty in Colombo with all the three major players not being able to see eye to eye. But in a way, it will actually be a blessing in disguise for India as well, simply because Colombo cannot lean towards Beijing more and more in the next 2.5 years, as there will be no political support within the country. And in the meanwhile, while all three of them are at least sounding to be friendly with New Delhi, I think it will be a good time for us to repair the relationship to whatever extent possible, keeping in mind that we ourselves are going for our elections early in 2019. Irrespective of what the outcome of our own elections would be, we still have a fairly wide enough chance of 1.5 years to mend ties with Sri Lanka to the extent possible. So I think political uncertainty within Sri Lanka can be used to our advantage.
But I mean, there's no certainty that the two factions will work together. So that could be like, as you know, Rajapaksa's tried to sign new deals with the Chinese, which were kind of sort of unconstitutional. So it'll be interesting in the days ahead to see how the turmoil takes a toll in our relationship with Sri Lanka, because we might not even know that whether the power rests with the prime minister or the president going forward.
Yeah, so that kind of emphasizes the point I was making. So economically, you cannot take any hard decisions in the next 1.5 years, knowing very well that the president or the prime minister would not like it one bit. So Sri Lanka would just be about managing to drift in troubled waters, waiting for the term of the parliament to end, and that in itself would be one opportunity for India, according to me.
And also that India, unlike in past, it's now even reaching out to Rajapaksa and is making all the political overtures to Rajapaksa, so that mean when as is believed, like his party is having the confidence of indigenous Sri Lankans, and is going to ramp home victory in the next presidential elections. India is taking care not to meant to keep all the three parties in a very good. So as
So
of now,
hmm,
India has actually is playing really very well, in the sense like it's not taking sides overtly, and making it seem as if it's waiting for the things to evolve or to take shape,
mhm.
which is like
So
kind of a clear and better
yeah.
strategy.
So now moving on to our other neighbors, I think you did briefly mention Maldives, that we did uh, show restraint in not having a military invasion, and tried to work behind the scenes to see that Yamin was defeated. But I think there is still a issue of I think the loans were that the China had given Maldives were supposed to be 1 billion, but eventually I think they were found to the tune of 3 billion. So I mean, Prime Minister Modi during uh, the President Ibu Soli's visit has promised financial aid. So it'll be interesting to see in the days ahead, like whether India delivers on its promises of aid to Maldives to overcome this crisis of having too much Chinese debt. Kishore,
Yeah,
your thoughts on? Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Haritha.
yeah. What I wanted to say was like before Soli's visit to India, his first ever foreign visit, Foreign Minister of Maldives made a brief visit to India, and during that time, India has announced a 700 million credit line to Maldives. And
Mm-hmm.
in addition to that,
Even a
just
credit swap, right? There was a credit swap also announced. Am I correct?
right, yeah. And then, like, during Soli's visit, Modi has announced 1.4 billion dollars of assistance. So this is
Mm-hmm.
to say that, like, while Maldives cannot immediately break off its ties from China, it's to
Mm-hmm.
assure Maldives that India is going to come to its assistance. And also, like, India has quietly got a promise from Maldives that it is going to advocate India first policy. So
Mm-hmm.
needless to say that, like, while it cannot completely come out of the strangles of China,
Mm-hmm.
India is going to have a better edge, considering all the political grueling the Indian archipelago has underwent.
Yeah, I mean, as I had said in the episode that me and Kishore did on Maldives, you can change your president overnight or your political overlords overnight, but you can't change your debt overnight. So that thing is going to be remaining over the Maldivian heads, that how to get over resolving this tricky debt issue, which they have racked up quite a bit of it. And also this newfound alliance between Ibu Soli and Mohammad Nasheed, and if that lasts the 5 years, because as we've seen in Sri Lanka, that so-called opposition alliance, which India has, as you said, midwifed, whether it didn't last the full 5 terms between Sirisena and Vikramasinghe. So we'll have to monitor Maldives for a long time. Now, moving on to Nepal, that's one of our other neighbors, and we know that India has had a hard time with dealing with Nepal, especially after the 2015 blockade, which ramped up anti-India sentiments and which led to the current Prime Minister Oli being swept into office in the general election. Now, one of the interesting developments I think which has occurred is that Prachanda, like the other communist party in the alliance, has been consciously being wooed by New Delhi, because I believe they have a 2.5 and a 2.5 year rotating prime minister term. So India is probably just looking to wait out Oli's term and get Prachanda back into office. So what are your thoughts? First, Kishore, like, what are your thoughts on that one? Then maybe Haritha, you can chime in later on.
Yeah, so with Nepal, I think I mean, just like in Sri Lanka and just like in Maldives, we need to wait for a real opportunity to actually come back and make a meaningful contribution. And luckily for us in Sri Lanka and Maldives, we had democratic institutions like the Supreme Court and the Speaker's chair in Sri Lanka, and also the Supreme Court in Maldives. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Helping to
Yeah.
restore democracy. Now, in case of Nepal, although we don't have any constitutional crisis as such, but there is no real opportunity which is shaping up where we can see India kind of make up for the lost time and make up for the lost place. So I think we
Mm-hmm.
just have to bide our time for a while, probably wait, as you mentioned, wait until Oli's term ends in the rotating arrangement that they have. And
Mm-hmm.
once Prachanda is back in, then probably kind of look for a stronger ties between the two nations.
Yeah, I think as in India, we have seen this 2.5 year CM rotating thing is never worked out well. So I guess let's see whether the government collapses if Oli willingly gives up his seat to Prachanda in probably, like, I would say, 1.5 year. I mean, I'm not sure when the 2.5 years of Oli is up.
And in fact, make no mistake, Nepal is one country which has a lot of political uncertainty. Governments fall left, right, and center almost all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have prime minister,
Uh-huh.
you have people who are prime ministers for hardly 7, 8, 9 months, and then
Yeah,
they go
yeah.
away. Then they bide their time for a year, year and a
Mm-hmm.
half, and then they come back again to become the PM.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the nature of the beast in Nepal.
Yeah. So, Harita, question
Uh,
for you. So, sorry, go ahead.
just want to add a piece of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
for long, Nepal's grouse towards India has been untimely deliverance. But
Mm-hmm.
making
I
up
think,
to
sorry
this,
to interrupt you, but I think that is the problem all around the neighborhood. That's why this commitment of Prime Minister Modi to Maldives has to be uh, kept, uh, and make sure there is no slippage in delivery, because as the neighbors always complain against India that we have been big in words but short on delivery.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's so sorry, go ahead. So that was a grouse that neighbors always have with India.
Yeah, that has been one thing, but what I wanted is like giving a massive fillip to this kind of a bad reputation. India is now all set to complete the first trans India Nepal oil pipeline within 3 months. Like the foundation stone for the same has been laid by Prime Minister Modi just 8 months back, and it's almost getting ready for its delivery. So what I mean to say is like India is also taking note of all the things which the neighbors have against it, and it's trying to expedite the projects as much as it can. And another thing about Prachanda is like has been an old horse to India,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
it's been like considering his own personal trauma which he is undergoing right now, because he lost his son just in the beginning of this year, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are out there to say that Prachanda may not is not particularly inclined to claim to have his claims to the prime ministerial position.
Mm-hmm.
But
Interesting.
as much as they were saying that like rather he would be the man who will be behind the scenes pulling all the strings. So
Okay.
not essentially after 2.5 years you might be seeing a kind of a leadership change in Nepal, but this is to say that India still have uh, it's like what do you say, aspirations in Nepal alive through Prachanda.
So, two questions
Yeah.
for you, Harita. One is, has the anti-India sentiment, which was very high after the 2015 blockade, died down, that it's a kind of neutral or maybe pro-India? And second question, since you were talking about infrastructure, there was a recently something in the news that the Chinese were wanting to build a railway line right from Tibet all the way across Nepal, right to the India border. So, what are your thoughts on these two questions?
Yeah, coming to this infrastructure thing, China has been planning extensively, but considering the kind of a backlash which China has been receiving, I don't think that project will be expedited in the way it has other projects. Next, and what also feel is China's commitment towards towards Nepal, sorry, has been in a way that it want to drift Nepal away from India, or to pull
Yeah,
Nepal
yes.
from the border of India, and rather strategically, it doesn't find it anything more significant than that. So, considering these equations between China and Nepal, these projects might be going at a very slower paces, just like the projects which have been facing hurdles, like Chinese projects which are facing hurdles in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, like
And
in Malaysia,
in
Myanmar.
Laos, Cambodia, where they are
Uh-huh.
like mired with the protests and things like that, similar kind of
Hmm.
a scenario can be expected in Nepal. And also coming to the first question about the anti-India sentiment dying down, I don't see that anti-India sentiment dying down rather quickly. But on the other hand, there are kind of a conflicting messages which India is sending to Nepal. So there is a kind of a that kind of a constant signaling from India is rather missing. So that has been my view, and then until unless this current leadership is going strong and sturdy, I don't think anti-Indian
Hmm.
sentiment is going to come when completely.
So is it better than 2015, or is it still the same?
See, considering all the communist parties coming together, it's going to be like rather difficult for India to break
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
leadership, this thing. And
Okay.
also, India shouldn't expect anything of that sort, but
Hmm.
India should make all its attempts to
Delivery.
delivery,
Delivery
and
of,
also
yeah, timely
continue its
delivery of
friendly
projects.
relationship with Nepal, despite whatever Nepal has been doing, like in the sense
Hmm.
like it should try to ignore the things like under BIMSTEC, Nepal has promised to send its troops to India for joint friendly exercise. But
Hmm.
Nepal at the 11th hour has pulled that thing. And
Yeah.
also even after
Yeah, there
taking
are
charge,
tensions.
Oli
Uh-huh.
government has failed to even send a foreign minister to India.
Hmm. Hmm.
So all these things would continue to exist, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, there are tensions. We just have to work on our delivery, that in the minds of the Nepalese people, like the pro-India sentiment grows over the years, because that will help us generate good opinion. So again, so now moving to a bit east to Bangladesh. So Bangladesh on probably in like 9 days, on 30th of December, goes to election. The incumbent prime minister, Sheikh Hasina, has been in power for the last 10 years. Interestingly, the last election, the opposition led by Khalida Zia had boycotted the elections. Now, it's always been an interesting dynamic in Bangladesh, because Sheikh Hasina has always been pro India. I mean, due to her family ties and the history behind it, we won't go deep into it. But whenever Khalida Zia has been in power, India, Bangladesh has always taken a nosedive bit, and also her association with the radical elements in Bangladesh. So, and then plus add to this, we had the Rohingya migrants crisis, where the migrants flowed into from Myanmar to Bangladesh, which created a tricky situation where India could had to take a very diplomatic position on this. So, Kishore, I'll start with you, and then Haritha, you can add on our India-Bangladesh relations.
Yeah, I think India-Bangladesh ties have been a real silver lining for Modi's foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
When we began, when Modi's term began, we had multiple issues with Bangladesh. I mean, we couldn't even figure out what to do with the Tista river
Yes.
water sharing issue. Although Mamta Banerjee herself was a constituent partner of the government in Delhi, and Manmohan Singh himself made a high-profile visit to Dhaka back then. So, despite all those misgivings and trust issues, I think the current government started well by taking up the hardest problem to solve in terms of the land boundary agreement, and ensured that it was implemented in a time-bound fashion. So luckily, we now have all the enclaves and the double enclaves and the enclaves within enclaves, all of them being sorted out. So the most complex land boundary ever in human history is now a thing of the past between India and Bangladesh. Now, having said that, it also is helping India when it comes to internal security. India can
Mm-hmm.
now really focus on guarding its borders by fencing it. So I think that was a win-win situation for both India and Bangladesh. Now, with that positive coming out, I think both Sheikh Hasina and Narendra Modi focused on getting the economic ties back on track. So you again have a lot of uh, trade investment happening in Bangladesh, and vice versa, where Bangladesh is also keen on
Yeah.
increasing its exports to India. So I think this is the kind of effect that we are seeing when it comes to positivity in the overall ties.
Yeah.
And a lot of credit has to go to Sheikh Hasina in that regard.
Yeah, I think in terms of agreement, we are even doing like helping them set up a nuclear power plant through Russian cooperation.
Exactly, where India will actually help by providing the manpower and the technical assistance.
Mm-hmm. Haritha?
Yeah, and also to say that there with elections round, there have been rumors that Pakistan has been meddling in Bangladesh elections. And then here it will be interesting to see the kind of Pakistan and Chinese involvement in Bangladesh elections. Um, just a week ago, a video conversation has surfaced in wherein
Mm-hmm.
the opposition leader had a conversation with the ISI handler of Pakistan, and there was talk about Chinese money. Until till the reference to the Chinese money, nobody has even expected that China would be also playing a role in Bangladesh elections. So the elections are going to be pretty much like the much watched affairs in the subcontinent. And also considering while Bangladesh is having close ties with India, and Prime Minister Modi has offered even $1 billion assistance to Bangladesh during his visit. It's to be recognized that China is also having huge investments in Bangladesh to the tune of $30 billion. And it's playing a major role in building exclusive economic zones. And China is also having 25% of it has bought 25% of Bangladesh stock market. So all
Mm-hmm.
these things must be considered because it's not only that Maldives or Sri Lanka that India is facing the Chinese larger growing Chinese influence. It's also in Bangladesh that India is going to have a tough time with
Yeah.
China. And also to this end, like while India is making attempts to join hands with Japan in developing ports, and with
Mhm.
Russia with regard to the Rupert nuclear reactor, as you mentioned already, it's to be like Bangladesh, considering that India has its largest land border with Bangladesh, it's going to be of great significance for Indian security. So,
Yeah, I think
maintaining,
the one thing is like the change of government. Like the interesting thing is, see, if you look at the neighborhood, like if you look at Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, even Bhutan, tiny Bhutan, like you had change of governments over the past 5 years or 3 years. So it'll be interesting to see if Sheikh Hasina can retain power, as you both mentioned. I think stability is of paramount importance. And the one point about Chinese investment, yeah, it's quite a bit, but they are also cognizant that when they see corruption. So I guess in one of the projects I read that when they found that China was trying to influence or bribe the local officials, they were kicked out of the project. So at least there is better pushback from Bangladesh, where they see like excessive Chinese meddling. And also interestingly, see, like this year I think we read that there were opening corridors where you could transport goods via the Bay of Bengal through Bangladesh into the northeast, which will help us overcome the chicken snake uh, bottleneck while transporting goods to the northeast. Now, if government like Khalida Zia, who's like not friendly to India, comes, I'm not sure if the I believe there's also a waterway route open to the northeast via the Brahmaputra, and also the land routes where you could ship go goods up to Chittagong, and they would be shipped transported by
to
land to northeast
yeah,
to
to
Tripura.
Tripura
Yeah,
precisely.
all that progress that has been achieved would come under I would say would be threatened, like if a change of government occurs. So
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But what is like really uh, a thing of little concern is like growing China Pakistan nexus in Bangladesh, because Pakistan already having its close ties with Jamaat-e Islam Muslim
mm-hmm,
militant outfit in
mm-hmm,
Bangladesh. India
mm-hmm.
has to closely watch to the changes or
Yeah,
whatever kind of ramifications Bangladesh is going
yeah,
through, and
yeah, we
also
all hope that the government Sheikh Hasina stays in power, because that's better for India's internal security situation.
yeah, here there is a dilemma for India in the sense like the growing reports of Sheikh Hasina's authoritarianism in Bangladesh, with
Mm-hmm.
journalists being jailed
Yeah, but I mean,
for
we have
their
turned a black eye. I mean, we have turned not a black eye, sorry, a blind eye to this, because it's in our interest, as Sheikh Hasina says. So we are not, uh, I mean, registering protest like with that, because it doesn't serve India any good to raise objections on these issues.
yep, exactly.
Yeah, so that gives us a perfect segue to talk about China, since we were talking about China's role in Bangladesh. So, China, the Indian government has had quite a bit of on and off conversations with China. So, just to bring our listeners up to speed. We had the Doklam issue, we had
Mm-hmm.
President Xi Jinping's visit to Ahmedabad, then Indian Prime Minister Modi's visit to China a couple of times,
Mm-hmm.
then India's admission into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization,
Yeah.
and how China continued to stonewall India's efforts to blacklist terror groups and terrorists based out of Pakistan. So,
Mm-hmm.
Mohal, I'll start off with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you see as the major stumbling block between the India and China ties as things stand today?
I mean, see, China, like maybe a decade ago, saw India as its peer. Now, after the global crisis in 2008, it sees itself on a different pedestal with on a like a G2 world where US and China are the only superpowers. So it doesn't consider India as a worthy equal. So what this has done is has created complications in the relationship where it would not, since it's in a position of strength which it perceives, it doesn't want to resolve any issues with India. And its influence, as you know, in the all the neighborhood countries that all of us have been mentioning has been growing. I mean, it's the proverbial 800-pound dragon in the room where any where India has to set up its engagement with its neighbors and focus on delivery where it has been lacking. Otherwise, it will be in a trouble. Now, for the time being, because of the trade war with US, I mean, in Wuhan, you can say that China was seeing that the relationship with India, especially after the Doklam incident, was going nowhere. So they called sort of a strategic timeout, and we had the Wuhan dialogue where they decided that okay, the temperatures had risen way too much, so let's call a timeout because it is not working for India. I mean, it's not that China is going to resolve the border dispute or all the other issues that we have, the contentious issues we have with them. What needs to be done is we need to have a new modus vivendi to resolve, like, how we will maintain peace and tranquility at the border, because the peace and tranquility which was probably signed in the late 90s, it doesn't work anymore. Because of, so we do have to, and I think the government has done a good job of upgrading the roads and the infrastructure leading up to the border, that any
Mhm.
Chinese misadventures can be fully contained like we did in Doklam. And we have to be watchful because I mean, China with its economy going down, I mean, already they are saying that for next year, Chinese growth could be zero, even though they fudge the figures on GDP growth, when they might show it to be 5 or 6%, but it might be net zero. So they might get restless and might try to provoke India into some kind of fight to stoke up nationalism at home.
Haritha?
Yeah, just continuing with where Mohal has left, I just want to reiterate that China has been really skeptical about India for quite some time, and this adds to our own misery in the sense like China has resolved all its territorial disputes with all other countries, Bhutan and India. Okay.
Right.
Even like just in the last month of in the last week of November, India has concluded the 21st round of special representatives meet to resolve the border dispute. While the Global Times has announced that congratulations that both India and China has finally arrived at a resolution to resolve this dispute. As it turns out to be, there are it's like rather the title has been misleading, and it appears that China has bowled a googly, misled India, but nothing much has moved. Not even an inch has moved from what it has been earlier. So this all means to say that like China is just is doing all this for optics. Rather, its intent has been quite different from what it has been saying or doing. And
Yeah, I mean,
together,
nobody should
yeah.
believe a word what Global Times says.
And also to say that like just yesterday Wang Yi was in India to say that India and China enhance its people to people relationship and work on improving the cultural ties. So this kind of on and off relationship from China is really misleading in the sense like after Wuhan, there were times like where China has had been really very adamant towards India, like finally nailing India's every attempt to get a membership into NSG, and also this Masood Azhar case, and also like refusing to even acknowledge that Pakistan has been the mothership of terrorism. And despite all its disagreements, what I feel that this China's on and off kind of a relationship with India is with respect to its relation with the international community. Right now, what I'm referring to is like facing crippling economic tariff trade war from China, and also with the Western countries raising some kind of concerns towards Chinese initiatives. China is kind of a feeling threatened, or rather to
Yeah.
say that it's feeling it's getting cornered. So
Mm-hmm.
to overcome this kind of a situation, I feel it is again making some kind of an overtures to India, which rather
Mm-hmm.
has no meaning. It's like what I can feel is it's all about theatrics and optics, but when it
Yeah.
comes to the real issue, there is nothing, hardly nothing has moved. See, India has been repeatedly raising the issue about China blocking India's access to its pharmaceutical sector or to its service sector, but nothing much has been done to this end. So the trade deficit has been raising, it's on a rise, and then there seems to be nothing much like
Yeah,
it's
the trade
doing.
deficit
So
went from like 2.5 to $5 billion. So that has been a failure of the current government's policy, that it has not been able to contain the trade deficit, which has actually doubled during its tenure. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that due to all the negative press that China has been getting from the blowback from the trade war with US, plus China getting cornered due to negative image in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand. I think he's just trying to make peace with India for the temporary, because it has other pressing issues where it needs his attention. And they know that with the domestic elections in India, the India won't take any harsh step. So it's just trying to make sure that the India US Bonheimer doesn't become very, very close in the meanwhile, because that would be uh, a bad sign for the Chinese.
In fact,
and
yeah,
and also
yeah.
to say that this unabated transgressions which have been happening across the LAC also stands to testimonies to the fact that China is not clearly intent in what kind of relations it want to have with India.
True.
Right, and one should not be surprised if China, through its mouthpiece newspapers and websites, would continue to parrot peace and stability with India, but would actually do the contrary on the ground. So, for example, it can continue sending out its submarines to the Indian Ocean region, riling up the Indian naval forces, and continue with its aggressive transgressions into across the line of actual control, as Haritha mentioned, while at the same time through its mouthpieces can actually talk about reducing the trade deficit also by probably in terms of opening up the Chinese services sector or the pharma sector or any other sector for that matter, which would kind of distract New Delhi's attention and would basically Beijing would want New Delhi to kind of commit more and more and fall more and more into Chinese orbit. So yeah, New Delhi should have to be watchful of that. And I think another issue that somehow has not improved for India when it comes to Beijing New Delhi ties is the manner in which the CPEC is shaping up. While analysts in Delhi are kind of waiting for CPEC to unravel economically, China is pumping in more resources to kind of make it into a military route as well, with presence of the Chinese military guarding the economic corridor, and also to shore up its investment both in Balochistan and elsewhere in Pakistan. So I think that move by China is only worsening the problems for India on its
But
Western
Kishore,
strategy.
see, I disagree slightly over there. So this during this military basis, now technically, yeah, it can be a refuel and resupply base, but I'm not sure if these will be useful in times of war, because unless they're properly guarded and reinforced in terms of, let's say, we're talking about, like, for example, Gwadar. Now Gwadar could be reinforced. Let's say they have a Chinese naval base, for example. But in the future, if war broke out, which I really doubt the Chinese would want to do that, India could easily bomb and take out the Gwadar port. So it's still yet to be seen regarding this military bases whether the host countries would allow. Yeah, they could be arm twisted into giving them refuel, resupply, so they would be excellent outposts in times of peace, but in times of conflict they would be highly vulnerable to Indian attacks, especially when the Chinese mainland is so far away.
I just want to add a bit to it in the sense like China Pakistan economic corridor as it is projected is not about economic cooperation, rather it is more about military cooperation, because like considering the kind of reports which are coming out from US, they are like unequivalent evidences to say that like Gwadar has as mentioned that it's going to have 11 berths. Mere 3 berths are ready as of now, and nothing much is being done in terms of constructing or developing the port. Pakistan military is actively involved in acquiring land in and around the port for developing another naval base, and then there is another installation which is supposed to be Pakistan Space Organization, which is quite close to the Gwadar area, where
Hmm.
China and Pakistan are together building satellites, which includes stealth satellites. And then just if you can refer back to the NYT column just yesterday, which has mentioned that China and Pakistan are together building several military weapons, arms, and equipment together. And then the helicopter. Currently, there is also an agreement that China and Pakistan are going to build helicopters together. So the all the kind of myth of it's like the economic cooperation is just a myth, and under its banner what is actually happening is a kind of a military cooperation. And don't forget that encirclement of India has been the topmost priority of China. And then this has been the only anti-India agenda, has been the only thing which brought China and Pakistan together. And also to add further, like China is, if you can consider the locations and regions where China of late has been making it in its investments, you can keenly understand that it has never been about economic returns. It has always been about strategic planning, and also about like it's either getting access through maritime points, or stabilizing itself or extending its tentacles across the globe. So we'll be doing great misservice if we still continues to believe that CPEC is all about economic cooperation. It's anything but economic cooperation, that's what I believe. And even the reports and also the facts which are coming now are clearly reiterating the same thing. And also like what one it's in one of the reports it's been cited like around like the China is making China and Pakistan together are making plans to develop an area around Gwadar where 5,000 Chinese can be accommodated in that region. So considering all these kind of developments and kind of tactical understanding between these two countries, it's like rather innocuous to believe that it's simply an economic cooperation. So, and also the strategic location of Gwadar port to Indian waters. It's one thing which India cannot ignore, and
Hmm.
it's high time
Yeah.
that something
Yeah,
must be something must be done, and then some strategies must be well in place to see that what is the kind of actual cooperation between these two countries.
right. Yes. So that actually kind of emphasizes how India's policy with regards to China is not all hunky dory. Another thing that we actually kind of didn't talk much about was the the Doklam issue, or what we call in India as the Dokala Pass imbroglio that we had last year, and there were talks about how there is a real possibility of India and China even going to war. But again, most of us felt that it was a far-fetched idea, especially since China was busy with the North Korean issue being at its most vulnerable at that point in time. Now, be that as it may, India and China had a lot of backroom negotiations also happening, and one thing that still has to be kept in mind is what happens when it comes to border disagreements between India and China. Mohal, how do you see all this panning out,
So
especially when it comes to border trips between the
yeah,
two?
I mean, there was a lot of the temperatures were certainly raised during the Doklam crisis. Now, there wasn't a very threat of war because India was the commanding the heights in the Doklam area, and they wanted to prevent the Chinese from getting a strategic foothold on the Jamperi Ridge, which overlooked like West Bengal. Now, as see if you see the history of China, they have been like bullying everybody since the past 30 years. Now, the last war which they truly sort of inflicted a crushing defeat was unfortunately on us in 1962. The next war after that, in the 1979 war against the Vietnamese, they didn't acquit themselves well, and the Vietnamese did give them a bloody nose, after which they withdrew. So, I mean, there's been no war fighting experience for the Chinese for probably around 30 years. And I think even the generals admit that's the biggest concern. So they won't like just try to open hostilities. Their a modus operandi like is basically to coerce, bully, like it's in the South China Sea, like proclaim like psyops and do propaganda war where they try to threaten and bully someone to uh, leave their position and vacate the area that China wants. So the bigger worry for India is not an open war, because see, if let's say China attacks and India has defensive posture as well, that we can blunt the attacks, they might gain some advantage in the beginning, but we can negate the advantage over the Tibetan plateau. So if they don't have a decisive outcome, it's going to project very badly for the Communist Party, which might have a lot of pressure and blowback at home. So unless they have a decisive advantage, they won't start a war with India or for anybody else. Their modus operandi is like slowly change the things on the ground, like Doklam, like yeah, increment into Indian held territory here or there or wherever they can get advantage, and then establish themselves so well that we cannot dislodge them and throw them out. So that's the bigger worry, that we need to build up infrastructure, roads leading up right up to the border, where we have not done a very good job. I mean, the previous governments, for its foolishness, has thought that by not building roads we can prevent a Chinese invasion, because it will be very hard for not neither us nor them to move across that harsh terrain. So we need to build up roads and infrastructure leading right up to the border, that any such provocations where they ingress into Indian territory, we can meet them firmly and prevent all their evil intentions right at the border.
Yes, Haritha, you have anything to add on to this?
Yeah, consider this 73-day Doklam standoff has offered India a huge advantage in the terms like world has keenly watched how India has resisted the historical threats of China, and it has appreciated like how India didn't yield to the pressures and also the psychopaths of China. And then this has given enough boost to India's image as a counterweight to China in the region. And immediately after Doklam, this ASEAN countries started looking out to India as a counterweight, and then the rest is history, as you can say that, because after that, all the 10 leaders have accepted India's invitation to be the chief guest for Republic Day celebrations, and then India and ASEAN have consolidated their friendly ties to a new high. So this I can see as a positive outcome for Doklam.
Valid point. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we will wrap it up here. We've had a very, very good, deep insight into how Indian foreign policy influences its neighborhood, and also vice versa, Indian neighborhood influences Indian foreign policy. Thank you, Harita, for giving your insights.
Thank you
That
for having me here.
Yeah, that, dear listeners, wraps up today's episode where we talk about India's neighborhood. But Harita will also be with us for the next episode as well, where we'll talk much more about Indian foreign policy and how the great powers of the world, like the US and Russia, would actually have a bearing on Indian foreign policy. So stay tuned for that, and let's catch up in the next episode. Until then, if you want to continue hearing about such interesting topics, we do recommend you to subscribe to our channel India Rising, and also tap on the bell icon to be notified whenever a new episode becomes available. In the meanwhile, we would also like to hear from you if you have any suggestions on any topics that you would like us to cover. But we would want you to remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy. So until the next episode, this is Haritha, Mohal, and Kishor signing off.